but is, you know, I can speak, you know, for Danaher, we've really taken the diversity and journey very seriously at our companies. And what that means is that everyone has a seat at the table, and can openly speak their mind and feel comfortable to bring their true, authentic selves to work every day. That's a mantra that we really live and breathe every day. And when I find where I was, for instance, in situations where maybe, let's say, I was sitting around a table of let's say all males, I found myself almost not necessarily comfortable in my own skin, especially earlier in my career. And I found that those were times when I found myself apologizing more for things that maybe I didn't necessarily need to apologize. So I really see that coming out, or saw that coming out, in situations where I wasn't 100% comfortable in myself, whether it was because I was new in my role, or they were, or I was sitting with people who I didn't know very well, or maybe they were even more senior level than me, regardless of gender. That really, you know, stands out to me. But I think what's important here to articulate is that regardless of who's managing and running the meeting, just make sure that your voice is heard, because you're there for a reason. And I think that's something that I've struggled with. It's like, look, you've been invited to the table here, so speak your mind, participate, share your ideas. And every time I was hesitant to say, gosh, should I speak up? Should I say something? What's really empowering for me is when people start piggybacking off of the comment that I made or the question that I asked. And it just confirms my confidence that, yeah, I'm so glad I spoke up and said something and contributed to the dialogue.
Yeah, I would say, you know, my experience at McKinsey is that I don't think there's any intentional bias going on, right? And we've actually instituted now a lot of de-biasing training throughout our entire journey. So from the moment that a resume comes through the door, through the interview, and through the entire time that you're there. So I don't think that this is kind of an old time situation where sort of outspoken biases are coming to place. But I think what happens and continues to happen, and this is why we're investing so heavily in training all of our leaders, and we have a big allies program and everyone participates in it, is there's unintentional biases that continue to happen. There's microaggressions that continue to happen, both based on race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. And that's what we're really, you know, now trying to fight. And what's to me kind of heartening is that I think many of our senior leaders are very want to make that journey and want to make that transition, but you've, you know, sort of got to realize that you're, you know, fighting perceptions that perhaps they were even raised with, right, as kids, and so you're trying to battle that. You know, now one thing that I, as an example, try to always do is encourage female colleagues when they join to immediately do a study that requires significant analytics and math, because that is one of the perceptions, right, that STEM is harder for some reason, or that, you know, women may not be as good at it. Just get out of that. Like, you know, rock your first study that is highly analytical, get everyone to realize, okay, this person is like superstar at this. You'll learn it if you don't know it. And then you've checked the box for yourself. You don't feel that insecurity anymore. And, you know, everyone else kind of knows that it's a strength for you as well.
And yeah, and kind of chiming in on that, I think that, again, in an industry that's predominantly male, for whatever reason that may be, generally I would say that there aren't actually norms that are set for women in the space. So it's kind of been interesting to navigate just little things, you know, like, for example, I think I look back on like my summer internship where, you know, you get 9 weeks to show your stuff and kind of
no, it doesn't have to be there. It can be anywhere.
I think someone's off.
Where do you want it?
Oh, cool. Basically during the internship where you get the opportunity to spend 9 weeks kind of showing who you are, hopefully get the return offer, and just kind of being aware of the fact that some of, for example, my male colleagues may have socialized with some of the managing directors, for example, and it's like, well, is that like a norm? Is that something that I should be doing as well? And just kind of the feedback around that, I think was, kind of perhaps something that wasn't really thought about. I like the point about it's not necessarily intentional bias. I think it's just the industry is what it is. And I think that there are a lot of efforts across banks, on Wall Street, so to speak, that, they recognize the numbers in terms of diverse candidates is extremely low, especially at the more senior level. So they are making more cognizant efforts to ensure that people have the tools that they need to succeed. But I think that there's still always going to be a kind of bias that's inherent that, I think when you're new again, there's a self-consciousness and don't necessarily want to rock the boat. However, I think it's still important to have the conversations with people that you identify with or just trust generally to kind of point out, hey, like, how come this person got to do that meeting and I didn't have the chance? There's something I should know, something I should do differently. And I love Eleanor's point about doing more analytical work or raising my hand for different types of things. I think that we're all keenly aware of the differences in the world. That's why we're at Ramba, and that's why we're a part of this panel. And I think that there just needs to be more people who speak up when you do observe these imbalances with gender expectations.
Thank you. Another thing I think that would be very helpful for everyone listening to hear would be if there are any certain kind of norms in your workplace that have made you feel less included. Ashley, this time we can start off with you.
Yeah, I think that efforts to socialize, I think in any industry are always going to be awkward, right? Because it's like the dynamic is these are your colleagues and your boss and so forth, but you're trying to have fun. I think one thing I look back on also from the summer internship experience was one of the managing directors has a country house. He invited all of us up for a day, and there's a lake and you can go swimming. Okay, that may seem fine initially, but if you think about it, it's like, well, do I feel comfortable like getting into a swimsuit around male colleagues, junior, senior bankers, and so forth? It depends. So little things like that, again, where I'm sure the intent wasn't anything uncomfortable necessarily, but when you think about it a little bit more, or you personally are in that situation, it may feel a little touch and go. And I think also things like, we have this sports betting kind of thing going on. Do all people like sports? No. Is it a driver of the Monday conversation? Sure. So I think little things where, again, it's just the norm for the specific office or industry, and just kind of thinking about how you feel within the situation. Maybe starting your own kind of touchstone for the group culturally and socially is cool if you so feel inclined. But I definitely would advise like anyone going into an industry post MBA to kind of just think about things that you enjoy, outside of work, and trying to find people who seem to enjoy the same things, and definitely connecting in that way throughout your internship. It goes a long way in terms of just kind of breaking down a lot of the barriers I know can be sticking points, especially when you're trying to ramp up and learn new things. It's easier to say like, hey, like, did you watch that episode of whatever show, or something like that seems so innocuous, but like go eons when it comes to just connecting with people and getting work done.
Yeah, I find the environments that I have struggled with the most are highly kind of aggressive conversations or debates, and I just don't like it, so I sort of retreat a little bit from those. I found that sometimes you just have to kind of power on and participate, but it's just not my style. And one thing that I've realized is you want to affect change across an institution, but you can also affect change within your teams. I didn't like one of the teams I was working with because they were having a lot of these highly aggressive conversations and intellectual debates. And at one point, this is a couple of years ago, I just raised it to one of the senior partners, and I just said, hey, we have this very intellectually aggressive culture. I don't think it suits a lot of people. I don't actually like it very much. And he said, oh, I didn't even realize that, and I gave a bunch of examples, and he agreed, and then we had a team norms meeting about it, and it actually did shift quite a bit from there onward. So I think sometimes we're also helping to educate our peers on what works for us and what doesn't, and we have to speak up, otherwise, they don't even realize necessarily how some behavior might be affecting others.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I would say as employers, one of the responsibilities we have as leaders is to create a safe space for our teams. And it starts at the top. It starts with leadership who embraces all differences, all backgrounds, and that's super important. And that's super important where I work and the environment that I foster. And it's great when that happens. You know, that said, we can use the sports analogy for a lot of things. I think ways that companies and you as future leaders can do is just make sure that, you know, when you step into your next workplace, make sure you're an advocate for those things. You know, create that safe space. Find out what motivates your colleagues and your coworkers and eventually your own teams. For me, I think the thing that comes to mind of where I didn't necessarily feel included was early in my career being part of the LGBTQ community. I didn't know if it was a safe space. I didn't know if I could share the fact that I had a wife, and you know, a few years ago, the language wasn't even as inclusive as it was. It was automatically of, oh, well, what does your boyfriend or husband do for work? And you never really know how to react to that. So for me, it's you know, in coming out, we're all constantly coming out. You just don't do it once. Every new team you inherit, every job that you start, you're constantly doing that. So it's important that where we work and where we spend a lot of our time is it's important that there's a safe space for that. And I'll give you an example. Is part of the associate resource group that I helped lead for Danaher. During last year, during Pride Month, we created friends and LGBTQ stickers for Pride Month. And I have to say that across our sites, it really helped foster that safe space where if we had a friend, let's say, put that sticker on their laptop or hang it in their office, it gave a signal to our LGBTQ plus associates that that was a safe space for them. That person's office was a place where they had an ally and a friend. So I think we can all play a part in that, regardless of where you sit in the organization. And I'm seeing it's good. You know, I'm seeing more and more businesses including those sorts of activities that include all cultures, all differences, and all backgrounds.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's been really insightful. Another thing that I think would really help everyone on this call would be if you all could share about how you advocate for yourself in the workplace. What are the strategies you use? For example, if it comes to negotiating a salary, if it comes to asking for a promotion or just asking for something more. We can start off with Nicole this time.
Sure. So the first things that come to mind in advocating for yourself is be prepared. Do your research. Collect the facts. So and practice, rehearse in front of the camera if you're going in to have an important discussion, maybe where you're negotiating your next position or asking for a raise. So practice and be prepared. The other thing too is, you know your value. Know that that you're valuable. It kind of goes back to doing your homework and knowing the facts. But go into meetings and be clear in what you're asking for and why. I find that people that have those sorts of plans tend to be more successful in the things that they're asking for. And I'll give you a personal example. I've been able to do something different in my career at Danaher over the course of many years, every couple of years, every 2 to 3 years. And it's not necessarily because I'm constantly approached and said, here's your next assignment or here's this next opportunity, but I go into one-on-one meetings with my manager regularly, and I go in prepared with things that I want to discuss, things that are on my mind, things that are important. If it's a development discussion, I go in with specific ideas and thoughts on what I think my next step could be on projects that I think I would be good at and would interest me. The other side of that is to really be, a great advocate for yourself is don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And sometimes you'll be successful at something and sometimes you won't, and that's okay. But I think visibility is key. If you have an opportunity, if someone reaches out to you, of a team of people, and asks for volunteers for a project, even if it's something that you know nothing about and you've been asked if you'd be interested, my recommendation is, if you can, take that opportunity, because it really goes a long way with networking, with learning. We also have what we call 70-20-10 model at Danaher. It's 70% of what we learn is on the job, experiential. 20% is through programs like mentorships and learning through others. And 10% is through physical formal trainings and coursework and those sorts of things. So really focus in on that 70% experiential, and that's where the magic is going to happen. That's where you're going to learn and get visibility to other parts of the business that maybe you didn't even know that you'd enjoy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, in many jobs, the negotiation for the salary is the kind of first and important one. And what I find is that usually the incoming salary people tend to negotiate, but what happens is that some colleagues are asking for promotions and for salary increases every year and a half or so, and some are never asking for it. They don't realize that they can or that they should or whatnot. And you can, every 2 years at a very minimum, you should be having a conversation about your next steps and what you're doing. At a place like McKinsey, you don't really, because it's sort of levels that are very fixed. And so you're not necessarily having salary conversations. Here, the advocacy is more about what kind of projects you get involved in, what role you play. It's as simple as asking, hey, can I participate in that meeting? Is it possible for me to attend? Or, oh, I realize we're going to be serving this client on this exciting issue. Could I be part of the team? And for the most part, it's actually, it's not like it takes some sort of magic to advocate. I think it just takes kind of the courage to ask questions and to assert your interest.
Yeah, I would piggyback off both Nicole and Eleanor and say, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the advocacy comes from just asking for help, generally speaking, and kind of knowing where to seek, whether it's guidance directly from someone who's, a year or two ahead of you that you see has success within the firm, or just asking for help as you take on those challenging assignments, and just knowing that there are people who can guide you throughout that process so you can succeed. Similar within banking, the salaries are fixed, titles are fixed, and so forth. So it's less about that and more making sure that you get to work with clients on transactions that you find interesting or challenging, kind of align with the goals that you have. And I think, again, just kind of identifying whether it's someone, some senior banker that you really admire, or just finding someone who has had a trajectory that is one that you hope to mirror. And also, I would say, just don't be afraid of creating your own trajectory too. So I definitely advocate for that.
Thank you so much. The next part of this session is the most interesting one, where you all get to ask your questions. Akshaya will be leading this session, and I'll let her speak about it.
Hi, everyone. So I put this in the chat, but I just want to let you all know that we're going to be slightly shifting our Q&A format. So to accommodate for tech issues, I'm going to ask that if you feel comfortable asking your question verbally, please go ahead and raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and I can unmute you and you can ask your question here. Or if you prefer, if you prefer for me to read out your question, you can put it in the Pathable chat. So folks, if you folks want to raise your hand and ask a question, please go for it. If not, I can start us off with a question that's already been put in the chat. I can read this out. So Rebecca Nash has a question for the panelists. She says that she's curious to know from your perspective how the idea of self-worth impacts women in business and how to support that self-worth in others.
My philosophy of work and life, candidly, I have a toddler, is what people crave is two things. One is significance and the other is belonging. Those are sort of the two things that I think everyone strives for, and we have to create those environments as leaders so that people have opportunities to feel that they are worthy because they are contributing. So my advice on self-worth is actually to practice putting yourself in situations where you can really have an impact, and then actually remember that impact. I think people tend to not remember that they've actually done things that have created real change. And if you want to create a list or whatever it is, like, okay, I did this project, or I did this piece of work and I changed these minds, or I created revenue, or I created impact in a society, or whatever it is. And so that's one thing. The other things to me is about belonging. And so it's about giving as much as it is about receiving. So if you're on a team and you can give back some of the other people, you will feel like you belong more, and that'll help. I also would say, though, that I think we put too much pressure on ourselves on this self-worth issue. Like, okay, somehow it's my fault if I don't feel confident. Like, what can I be doing better, or what am I doing wrong? And so that's why I do think it is on the environments themselves to also help you find those moments where you can grow and feel more confident over time. Don't put all the pressure on you to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would agree 100% with what Eleonora said. The word that really resonated is belonging. And all of the surveys and studies that we've done that's the biggest impact that that employers can have on their teams, is that they need to feel like they belong. I think the other part of that is they really need to feel you need to feel connected to your work. So I would just encourage you to really find your passion, find the work that matters for you personally. Our motto is, realizing life's potential. We're in the business of science and technology, so truly life-saving applications for a variety of different things. And when you can put a family member's face on a test kit that your company has created, for instance, that might be really impactful and meaningful for you. You might have a passion for sports and athletic. I think in one of our other sessions, we had someone who was a professional athlete. I mean, find your passion and find what motivates you. And I tell you, that'll make getting up in the morning, find what really gets you up in the morning and excited. And, not every day is going to be perfect, but for the most part, having that connection to the work that you do is really important to your self-worth. And know that you create your self-worth as well. I mean, no one else can tell you what that is. I mean, you all have great things to offer, and we all have different skills and interests. And what you bring to the table uniquely for you is going to add value wherever your career path takes you. So just remember that.
Yeah, I mean, not much more to add beyond, I think on some level having big and small goals is helpful, because definitely not every assignment or client that you have is going to be the most exciting thing in the world. So kind of thinking about maybe 2 or 3 things that you just hope to gain from the experience is kind of a nice boost to self-worth, and I think ego too. Like, I think a healthy ego is nice. So yeah, just maybe the client is really frustrating because you don't like the industry or something that you're working on, but you can pull away some great modeling skills or great presentation skills or something like that definitely kind of help get through not only that assignment, but also kind of big picture advance you throughout your career, hopefully.
Thank you all so much for your answers. That was a great question. I think that's top of mind for a lot of us here. So are there any other questions that folks in the audience would like to ask? Again, please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Seeing no hands raised, I think that this might be a good time for us to transition into breakout rooms, if that's okay with everyone else. I am going to go ahead and so the way that our breakout rooms are going to work is that we're going to be moving into 3 breakout rooms. So that should be about a little bit less than 15 per. I did the math of 45. So, but each breakout room will have one of the panelists, and we'll have some prompting questions that I will be putting in the Pathable chat, or you can ask whatever questions that you feel that you would like to ask. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms now, and I will see you all in the breakout rooms.